Okay, so the nominalist puts forward the criticism of realism about abstract universals. According to the criticism, the formal cause argument for realism about universals leads to an unacceptable infinite regress of abstract universals. The situation is this. According to realism, we have Morris, Felix, and Garfield, say, these three cats. And remember, our question is, what is it about them that makes them cats? And the answer the realist gives is that there's a shared attribute among them, that Morris exemplifies catness, Felix exemplifies catness, Garfield exemplifies catness. So, for example, Morris is a cat because Morris exemplifies catness. So we're answering the question, why is Morris a member of the cat species? Well, because he, like every other member of the cat species, exemplifies catness. But now, why can't we ask, why does Morris exemplify catness? After all, the realist has now got us committed to the claim that Morris exemplifies catness, Felix exemplifies catness, Garfield exemplifies catness, etc. That's what explains why Morris, Felix, and Garfield are cats. But we can now ask, why does Morris exemplify catness? And likewise for Felix and Garfield, why do any of them exemplify catness? Exemplified catness would now be a further shared attribute of Morris, Felix, and Garfield. So not only do they have in common that they are cats, which is explained by saying that they share the quality of catness, we now have to explain why each of them exemplifies catness. Well, according to the realist model, each of them would exemplify catness because each of them exemplifies the property of exemplifying catness. And that would have to be a different property than catness. Okay, so we now have two properties. We have the property of catness, which explains why they're all cats. And now we have to explain why each of them exemplifies catness. Why is there that common thread among the three, that this one exemplifies catness, and this one does, and this one does? And the answer on the realist model would have to be that each of them has the property of exemplifying catness, which would now be a second property. And we can now, at the third level, ask why each of them has the property of exemplifying catness, and the answer would have to be a third property, because each of them has the property of exemplifying the property of exemplifying catness, and so on, leading to now an infinite series of exemplifying catness properties. The nominalist finds this infinite regress of abstract universals unacceptable. He'd rather just say, well, it's a brute fact that Morris is a cat, rather than, and that Felix is a cat and that Garfield is a cat, rather than go off to the races with an infinite series of universals: catness, exemplifying catness, exemplifying catness, exemplifying, exemplifying, exemplifying Katniss, and so on ad infinitum. So this would be the nominalist attempt to defend the brute fact theory by saying, well, if no theory will really work except for the theory that Morris, Felix, and Garfield share the property of Katniss, well then no theory works, because that theory doesn't work. It leads to an unacceptable infinite regress, so we'll just accept the idea that cats exist and that cannot be explained, which would, if sound, enable the nominalist to avoid positing the existence of abstract, shareable, universal properties. So I guess the issue now becomes whether an infinite explanatory regress can be acceptable. Now, in the earlier case of an infinite regress of parenting cats going back and back and back, we didn't find it acceptable. But that may just be because there are good reasons to reject the idea that cats, in particular, infinitely regress back in the history of the cosmos, forever and ever back. But I don't see that necessarily precludes the possibility of an infinite explanatory regress in general. I guess that would depend on the plausibility or possibility of the universe having an infinite past. I mean, if it's possible the universe does have an infinite past, then for some category of objects, there could be a regress that goes back infinitely. I mean, if we think of the creation of the universe, one possibility is that it starts at a certain point, that it just commences somehow. And the other is that at each point there's always an earlier point that explains it, and it goes back forever. So I don't see that in general we should exclude the possibility of an infinite explanatory regress. Unlike cats, which seem to be a finite group in terms of their history. There might be other kinds of objects which can go back forever, including abstract objects, things like shapes and numbers and so forth. Right. So the formal cause argument, though controversial, may prove to be sound, provided that the nominalist cannot come up with an adequate account of things falling into kinds, an account which does not presuppose the existence of any shared properties. So far, we haven't seen an adequate nominalist explanation. The realist has their explanation. Nominalists would need to come up with one that's competitive to make their case in terms of the formal cause argument, at any rate. Let's turn now to the second traditional argument in favor of universals, the abstraction argument. Unlike the formal cause argument, which is metaphysical in nature, the abstraction argument can be understood as an epistemological argument, having to do with our knowledge of our knowledge of things that fall into kinds. So the first premise of the abstraction argument can be put this way. We can perceive that Morris is a cat, that Felix is a cat, that Garfield is a cat, and so on. Secondly, there must be something about Morris, Felix, and Garfield which accounts for our being able to perceive that all of them are cats. Thirdly, this something can only be their catness. Therefore, catness exists. Okay, here again, the first premise seems to be acceptable to a nominalist, that we can perceive that Morris is a cat, Garfield is a cat, Felix is a cat, and so on. So the nominalist is not going to question the first premise and would question either the second or third premise of the argument. The second premise, remember, says that there's got to be something about Morris, Garfield, and Felix which accounts for our being able to perceive that all of them are cats. So we can see that all of them are cats, but what are we picking up on when we perceive that? Mustn't there be some common factor that we are aware of in perception which clues us into the fact that we're perceiving a number of items that all belong to the kind cat? And what could that be except for their catness? Can the nominalist come up with some other explanation other than the explanation that we are aware of the catness of Morris when we perceive Morris, we're aware of the catness of Garfield when we perceive Garfield, and aware of the catness of Felix when we perceive Felix, and it's through that awareness of the shared property that we're aware that Morris, Felix, and Garfield are all cats. That's the explanation of our ability to perceive that all of them are cats that the realist endorses. What explanation can the nominalist endorse, given that the nominalist rejects the reality of any shared properties? What would be the common thing that we perceive when we see that all of them are cats? The realist presupposes here what's known as the abstractionist theory of concept formation. According to this theory of concept formation, we can form concepts by generalizing or abstracting from our perceptions of particular instances of the concepts in question. According to proponents of the abstraction argument that make use of this abstractionist theory of concept formation, we can become acquainted with an attribute like catness by generalizing or abstracting from our perceptions of particular things which exemplify that attribute. So the idea is that as very young children or babies, we form concepts. For example, we form the concept, say, of a cat, and the concept of a dog, and the concept of red, and the concept of blue, and so on. And how do we do this? We do it by generalizing or abstracting from our perceptions of particular examples or instances of these attributes. So on Monday, say, a very young child perceives a cat, Felix, and then on Tuesday it perceives another cat, or it perceives Felix again, and then on Wednesday it perceives a cat, and on Thursday likewise, and so on and so on. And eventually it begins to dawn on the child that there's a common thread among these perceptions, which the child is told to label as cat. So the child begins through repetition of experience of a thing of a certain kind, the common property which all members of that kind share, in this case catness, and likewise for dogs. So the idea is that once we've mastered the concept, we can then use that concept to classify objects as belonging to that kind. And that's how we would understand our ability to perceive that Morris, Felix, and Garfield are cats. At a very early stage in our existence, we mastered the concept of cat, which we learned in the first place from our perceptions of individual cats, whereby we generalized or abstracted out the common qualities shared by all these instances that we perceived. So we become acquainted with a shareable attribute by generalizing or abstracting from our perceptions of particular things that have that attribute. It seems, in fact, that we can extend our knowledge of the things that fall under a common attribute or belong to a specific kind through our acquaintance with the shared quality, through our having mastered the concept of a thing of that sort. Suppose, for example, that as a child you learned the concept of dog from perceiving specific types of dogs that are generally around you. So you might have learned that Cocker Spaniels are dogs, and Collies, and German Shepherds, and Labrador Retrievers, and so on. So these were the types of dogs that you saw, and from that you develop a concept of dog. But at a later point in your life, you might run into a new type of dog that you had never seen before, but which nonetheless you would readily be able to identify as a dog to a fairly high degree of certainty, even though you had never seen a dog of that sort before. You might say, gee, look at this very strange type of dog. I never saw one like that before. It might be, for example, a Russian wolfhound. Say you had never seen a Russian wolfhound before, but it had enough similarity to the other kinds of dogs that you've seen before that you could apply the concept of dog to it with a high degree, justifiably high degree of confidence. So the nominalist, if he's going to effectively respond to this argument, has to come up with, it seems, with some other explanation of how it is that we're able to classify dogs and cats and things of other kinds. It doesn't seem plausible for them to say that it's simply a brute fact that we're able to classify these things in the ways that we do. Seems like there must be some explanation of how we do it. So this would be a further challenge for the nominalists to come up with an alternative explanation that accounts for our ability to classify through perception various objects such as cats, dogs, horses, and so on, as being of the kinds that they are. I now turn to the third and final traditional argument for realism about abstract universals. This is the linguistic argument. The linguistic argument focuses on the problem of the connections between words and things. We're all familiar with the fact that human beings are adept at using languages, in particular natural languages, such as English, for example, to talk about various kinds of things that exist in the world. For example, the word cat, and here I want to emphasize I'm talking about the word, not about cats, about the concatenation of letters consisting of C joined with A joined with T. So I'll put that in little quotes. So the first premise of the argument might be that the term cat denotes or refers to Morris, Garfield, Felix, and so on and so forth. So this term denotes or refers to all of these objects, which happen to be cats. Secondly, there must be something about Morris, Felix, and Garfield which accounts for the term cat denoting or referring to all of them. But there's got to be something that connects these objects in the world, Morris, Felix, and Garfield, to the word cat, which explains why the word cat refers to them, but not to other things. Like, for example, Rover, Fido, and Spot. The word cat picks out Morris, Felix, and Garfield, and many others, but among those others are not Rover, Fido, and Spot. Right? The word cat doesn't specify them. The word dog does, but not the word cat. But why is that? Well, there's got to be something about Morris, Felix, and Garfield that relates them to the word cat, and something about Rover, Fido, and Spot that relates them to the word dog, right? But not to the word cat. What is that, though? What is it that connects words to the things that they connect to, rather than other things that they don't connect to? What is that? There must be something about Morris, Felix, Garfield, and so on, which accounts for the term cat denoting all of them. This something, according to the realist, can only be their catness. Therefore, catness exists. According to proponents of the linguistic argument, the meaning of any general term, for example, a common noun, an adjective, a verb, an adverb, or a preposition, the meaning of any of these sorts of general terms is an attribute signified by that general term. In the case of prepositions, the attribute would be a relation, like the relation of being in, or on, or beside, or between. In the other cases, the cases of common nouns, adjectives, verbs, and adverbs, the attribute would be a shareable quality or property. The basic idea of the theory of meaning presupposed by the linguistic argument is that a general term, call it T, denotes objects O1 through ON if and only if the attribute signified by the linguistic term T is exemplified by each of O1 through ON. So let me let me put that to you again. So the basic idea of this theory of meaning, which, by the way, is defended by Bertrand Russell in the Problems of Philosophy. The basic idea is that the meaning of a word, at least a word of these general types, common nouns, adjectives, verbs, adverbs, prepositions, and so forth, the kinds of words that you would find defined in a dictionary, as opposed to proper names, which properly wouldn't be included in a dictionary, like George Washington or Donald Trump or Albert Einstein or what have you. In those cases, the proper name doesn't, according to Russell, doesn't appear to have any general meaning. It just is a label or tag which stands for a particular object, and so we don't really define what it means. So the kinds of words that are included here, common nouns, adjectives, verbs, adverbs, and prepositions, have a standard meaning, and this standard meaning is something that they acquire by being conventionally associated in the language with a particular shareable universal, either a property or a relation. We originally developed the concept of a universal or shareable property or attribute. Remember, we developed it through, according to the abstraction argument, through our perceptual experience of particular things. Once we have that concept, we conventionally associate it within the context of a given language with certain essentially arbitrary symbols that the language uses. So we perceived some cats as children. We developed an associated concept of the quality catness. We then used the symbol CAT within English to signify that quality which we learned about through our experience and generalization from particular instances. We perceive particular cats, in other words, generalize or abstract out the quality of catness, and then use the symbol CAT in our language by convention to signify that quality of catness. So that would be the story of how the word catness gets its meaning, according to the proponent of the linguistic argument. So we can now say that the connection between words and things is that words signify certain shareable attributes. When those shareable attributes are exemplified by a group of objects, then that word can be said to denote or refer to all the members of that class of objects. So I'll repeat. A general term, like cat, denotes objects 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., etc., if and only if the attribute which the word cat signifies, namely catness, is exemplified by each one of those objects, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So each one of them has the quality of catness, then the word CAT will refer to them because the meaning of CAT is that quality which they have, the quality of catness. So catness then relates both to objects and to words. So it's the connecting factor that enables words to connect up with things. Catness connects to objects in that a number of objects can have that quality of catness. Catness connects with the word CAT because we conventionally use CAT to signify or express that very quality of catness. Thereby, the word CAT is connected to Morris, Felix, and Garfield. Morris, Felix, and Garfield have the very property which serves as the meaning of the arbitrary symbol CAT. So that's how CAT connects to Morris, Felix, and Garfield. So then there is something about Morris, Felix, and Garfield, according to the linguistic argument, which enables the term CAT to denote Morris, Felix, and Garfield. It's that Morris, Felix, and Garfield have this quality of catness, which is the very meaning of the symbol CAT, at least in English. Of course, in other languages, say Spanish, they don't use CAT, they have a different word, which they use to signify that very quality which Morris, Felix, and Garfield have. They use the word gato. And for them, the arbitrary symbol gato signifies that very quality which we observe in cats, that quality of catness. So in Spanish, the word gato signifies Morris, Felix, and Garfield, just as in English, the word cat signifies Morris, Felix, and Garfield. So here again, the nominalist, it seems, must find some other explanation which accounts for the word cat referring to Morris, Felix, and Garfield, or the word dog referring to Grover, Fido, and Spot. Some explanation other than that these words signify abstract, shareable universals or attributes which are exemplified by the objects which these words denote. They have to come up with some other explanation, some other account of how words link up with things. But it's not clear what that account would be. So again, the ball is in the nominalist court to come up with an alternative explanation that will account for terms in our language denoting or referring to groups of objects or kinds of objects. These observations lead to a further consideration that seems to give support to realism. It has to do with the possibility of communication. We will have a look at this argument in connection with Bertrand Russell's theories of knowledge by acquaintance and description. This is a topic that we touched on already when we were talking about Berkeley's anti-realist view of material object, anti-realist view about material objects and houses, mountains, and trees. However, I want to return in our next topic in this last unit to Russell's chapter on knowledge by acquaintance and description, and we'll do that in our next lecture this Tuesday.